do we teach? And if we look at Europe as it is at the moment, probably we can agree with what somebody said. The priority of all priorities is employability and employment. No matter at which level, but employability is priority number one. And if we look at language, there are 3 quotes. I call them 3 leitmotifs, the musical term. It's a theme which comes back again and again in different shapes, but basically it remains the same idea. Now these 3 leitmotifs are 3 quotes here. Number 1, using language is doing things with words. In other words, when you use language, you do something. And if you do something, you need to take responsibility of what you do. I think that's something that is not told very often to our learners, to our students. They need to take automatically responsibility of what they do. Second, every teacher is a language teacher. I don't know what things are like in your schools. In my schools, or my school, for a long time, and it's only changing recently. It has only changed recently. It has already begun to change recently, I must say. There was that opinion that language development, that's what we have language teachers for. Other subjects, language does not matter. Subject, content matters. I'm generalizing, of course. And I think that's a topic that could probably be raised in a staff meeting at some stage. Language is, you can't imagine language without content. And language, you can't imagine learning without language. Whatever we do when we learn, at some stage, language comes in. We retrieve information via texts, via language. In our mental directories, we sort of save content in words. Pictures, yes, but it's language. And we reproduce, when we reproduce, it's language. I'm not talking about foreign languages as mother tongue, but it is language. So every teacher has a responsibility as a language teacher. It does not matter, it matters at which language level communication in class takes place in the sports lesson or in the music lesson. It matters. And number 3, those who speak French will understand. For others, I will translate a sentence I like a lot. On n'habite pas un pays, on habite ses langues. We don't live in a country, we live in our languages. Something to reflect upon, and something that takes us back to this idea of identity. What we do in terms of the languages we use, we know, we somehow understand, are part of who we are and where we are. So we have those 3 elements: action-oriented, interdisciplinary, and awareness of language and self, who I am. Now this may sound a little bit theoretic, but in principle I think that's what language education is about, because it's not just for grades. Are we sure? Do we agree? And the word is empowerment. And I'm looking at future, at our learners' future. We want our learners, don't we? We want our learners to be strong outside this classroom. We want our learners to be independent. We want our learners to be able to run their lives to a certain extent. We don't want them to be dependent on other people who decide about them and for them. We don't want them to wait for what's going to happen and not to happen. We want them to be active. So the English word is we want to empower them, we want to make them powerful. So, 3 elements which come into teaching, not testing. Because there are a few things that you won't be able to test. But back to that later on. The Common European Framework was a document which was developed for reasons which we have discussed. Beyond that, in Europe, there's a discussion, what are the actual aims of education? And basically, and you will find that in many European documents, we have 2 umbrella objectives of education. Citizenship, people who can actively take part in what is going on, and employability, people who are attractive to the labour market, no matter what the labour market will look like in the future. We will look at that. I've tried to find some definitions. No need for you to copy. You get that. It's much rather like to talk a little bit about and feel free to ask, to come in. Citizenship is a bundle of things. There's not one category which makes you an active citizen. It's skills of, first, asking, inquiry. People who don't ask. What's the Spanish word for offside in football? Okay. People who don't ask. Communication, participation, taking action, responsible action. Remember, that comes back. This is based on self-confidence and a few other things. So that's one of the things we go for. And the second thing is employability. Again, a set of achievements. Not one single thing. It's skills, understanding, personal attributes which make people more likely to gain employment and be successful there. This includes academic qualifications, of course, but it's not obligatory. Not everybody goes on to university. So we have those 2 umbrella objectives. And 1 or 2 more thoughts before we come back to the more special things. The situation is dramatic. And we can't go on teaching as if that were not the case. I don't think we can. So there are various things that we need to be aware of. But one thing I think is that we need to be aware of what's going on outside and what will help our learners, what will empower our learners when they leave the school, when they leave the classroom. It's difficult to see the future, but there are predictions and there are analyses. And for instance, one analysis says that our graduates, people who are in our classes now, will, when they have left school, will change jobs 7 times on average. And not just jobs within the same domain, but also métiers. So in other words, if we want to empower them, we must help them to get mobile, to develop a degree of flexibility, mobility. Second thing, the share of jobs held by highly qualified will increase at the expense of those who are low qualified. In other words, qualification matters, will matter, and good qualifications matter. We don't say now what is good qualification, but we can agree that they matter. So the question arises, what do we aim education at? What is language education? What is it supposed to aim at? In other words, is there a particular profession that we should target? Maybe, maybe not. Who tells us that that profession is still available when our kids leave school? So, what is it then that matters? And I've tried to come up with one or two ideas. It doesn't say phrasal verbs. It doesn't say tenses of the past. It doesn't say conditionals. But it applies to our classes. Readiness to learn. Management of time. Team spirit. Social conscience. Reflection. Documentation. And so forth. These are things that are not specifically, that do not specifically apply to language only, but they do apply to language as well, as they apply to us. Now, these are things that, in a way, add to a concept of competence. We haven't used that word a lot. We've been talking about skills, haven't we? About levels. But we have not yet talking about competence. And competence, there is reasonable agreement out there about this model. Competence is a mix of three elements: of knowing things, the capital of Bangladesh, of knowing how to do things, of saying the capital of Bangladesh is, by the way, what is it? I don't know. It's in Nepal, there are no Kathmandu, right? So being able to say, but there is another thing, and that thing is called attitude. It's the values, the emotional aspect, which are above or lie underneath, I don't know, of what we know and how we use what we know. So, attitude, knowledge, skills, and attitude. And those things here all refer to attitude. Now if you look at that level, at that model of competence, knowledge you can teach. Skills you can teach and practice. Attitude you can't teach. Attitude you can show. So this is one of the crucial things, I believe, on teacher development and teacher education. Here we are. We teach, what we teach is this. What we are or are not. That's the whole thing. We have all met teachers who were experts in their field, but probably didn't have the emotional intelligence to run the course. We have met teachers who were excellent trainers, who developed exercises, activities, tasks, etc., etc. But still, we didn't feel well looked after. There was something missing. They probably were very lousy in terms of documentation. We have known, and we know chaotic teachers, don't we? We know people who don't keep deadlines. How can we expect our students to keep deadlines and to develop something like that if we don't do it ourselves? Very strong words, I know, I'm sorry. So, and another thing, we were talking about qualification. This and that can be tested. And we do test. But looking back at the previous slides, in terms of citizenship and employability, that matters equally strongly. And that we cannot test. But we can probably collect evidence. And this is where this idea, this language portfolio idea of the dossier comes out. So this is where we develop, or we help our students to develop their own well-documented and organized dossier of things. So that when they go for a job interview, they don't come up with a certificate only, but they can show what is behind and below that certificate. And many of our students, I don't know what the situation is like here, only come here with this and don't have any real evidence of why their grade was the way it was. So, here we are, destination competence. I promise I'll be back to something more concrete soon. Now, what is that attitude? And I would like to come up with a little exercise. Have you ever tried miming in your classes? Now, whenever you run out of words, that does not necessarily have to be the end of communication, as we know. Sometimes we show. When I wanted to pay for my coffee, I don't know the Spanish sentence saying, how much is that? Or what do I pay for my coffee? What I did was, I had my purse and the empty cup. And it perfectly understood that it was €1 for that coffee. And €1, I did understand. So, there is a lot more than words to communication, as we know. And let's try a little exercise. These are very abstract things, aren't they? Right? And if I ask you to give a definition of what team spirit is, you probably could, because you are high-level speakers. But imagine we were not. So, the little exercise I would like to ask you to do is, in pairs, right? You choose, don't say, which you choose one of these things, right? And pantomime to the other, right? And once the person might guess, right? And once she or he has guessed correctly, you just swap roles. A little exercise after long talking, I thought there could be a little bit of a movement. So choose one thing, one of those, don't say what you choose, and then pantomime. No words, just pantomime. Your turn. Yeah.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Okay.
It's
I am.
Okay.
I'm just finding.
Okay, all right.
Just miming, yeah, no words.
Yeah.
Which was that? How you guys work? What did you do?
That's the easy one.
Pardon?
Good, well, if you succeed in trying
Hello, I don't know your names, but let me have a look. I would like to call you by your name.
That's good.
Can you try? You finished. You finished. Well, just try one more.
Okay, a difficult one.
It's getting more money because you've chosen the easy one.
Exactly. Which one do you think are the easiest ones?
Humor at work is probably not so difficult.
Really?
Critical thinking probably.
Critical thinking is one.
Anyway, try it.
Okay, can we use also?
Yeah.
Okay,
Working spirit is fine.
No, she was okay.
Oh, well. All right, great. That's a word.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, it's just,
Okay, we've had a bit of fun. Probably something that you might want to use in your classes. You will find out that people who are probably not among the high achievers in language, text-based language, are probably, they have to do some compensation. They're probably extra, very special minds, because they are not used, they know that their language repertoire is limited, and they are used to doing with communicating with their words, body language, etc., etc. Right? So that's something that is probably worth trying. Miming as an exercise, because you find a lot of those things. If you do that, you actually practice some of those things, right? If you mime to your partner, this is teamwork, because you do what you can, and while you're doing it, you check, does that person understand? If you have the idea, yes, he or she understands, you move on that same direction, you go deeper. If you have that feeling, blank, you have to give it a new try. You have to try it differently. So that's basically it. You practice humor at work. You are in a way, you express solidarity because you have a common goal. You want him or her to understand, and she or he wants to understand. And authenticity, many other things. You're actually practicing this when you do a miming exercise. Same? Any comments on what I said just before? About competence, about citizenship and employability? Is there anything you would like to comment?
I think,
Add to that?
sorry, I think critical thinking in this case, I think it's quite crucial when it comes to speaking of B1, because it's probably the clash. Most of us will have a clear idea of what A1, A2 level is, and what C2 and C1 level is. But the problem comes when we have to work and define where the limits are in our B1 level. So probably critical thinking is something quite important for us to show our students so that they mold their language and the way they speak, so as to go towards C levels.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for raising this. There is one thing, I don't pretend that I know the answers to all that, but if as a sort of rule of the game, beginning, remember I talked about rules of the game, if a sort of rule of the game, at the beginning of your language class, generally speaking, you ask somebody to sum up. The question is, what did we do last lesson? Simple question. By teaching your learners to report, you help them a lot to develop critical thinking, because they will report what is uppermost in their minds. And that already is the result of grading of what is important and what is less important. They will probably not report on something which they have not found important. Usually they start with what they found important. You may extend that. I don't know what the situation in your schools is, but probably the previous lesson, the lesson previous to your English lesson, I don't know, is a maths lesson, or a physics lesson, or history, I don't know.
No, we
We
don't
don't
have.
have school.
You don't, it's just language.
Yeah.
It's just language, sorry. But if that were the case, you could also ask them to report about another lesson. If it's only language, ask them to report about something they have heard, they have seen, in between your lesson and your previous lesson, right? It's a pedagogical instrument, and that is reporting. That's called reporting. Is about reactivating what is past, because you can only report about something in the past. It practices tenses, the tenses of the past, and it tells you as a trainer what has landed in your students' brains and what hasn't. And I think that's something really is probably not done often enough. You can always overdo things, but it's probably not done often enough.
Can I add something to what
Yes,
Alfonso just said? The idea of critical thinking in that you put there about, you didn't put questionnaires, what did you put? Reflection.
Reflection, yeah.
That I think that a lot of the time reflection isn't taught taught, it isn't used as an indicator of what's actually happening.
Yeah.
Because the students don't, they expect, for example, that they're going to be spoon-fed,
Yeah.
right? And they don't actually think about the process, they don't think about what they've learned, if they learned it well, if there are difficulties and things like that. When you ask them to be critical about what's actually happening, at the beginning they quite often, because I do a lot of questionnaires, so I ask them what they think, what they see, etc. And quite often, at the beginning, some of them who are not used to the process will answer you what they think you want to read, as opposed to giving the kind of what they actually think. And they've got to get rid of that in order to tell you, it doesn't work, it hasn't worked, I didn't learn it, I didn't understand it. Once they do that, then they're already on a process to learning.
Yeah.
So,
Now, we are always we are in a process. We've never reached the final destination, which is good in the end. And when we say critical thinking, there are different levels of critical thinking, of course. If we talk in language terms, at the basic level, we only can say what we like or what we dislike, right? Higher up, we can probably be differentiated more in more detail. But as a principle, it is there, critical thinking. It is something that we should encourage as much as we can. Questionnaire is a very useful instrument, very useful tool for that. I have looked into the famous framework for descriptors, in search of descriptors who might describe some of this within the framework language and concept. And I found a few things. I would like to share them with you. For instance, there is a list of descriptors on goal-oriented cooperation. This is always language focused, but it is language for a purpose. It's language for the purpose of cooperation. And here we find interesting things, don't we? A2 level, it's interesting that this is part of the framework. The speaker takes the trouble, if the speaker, well, let's begin at the bottom. Can communicate in simple routine tasks using simple phrases to ask for and provide things. Ask for things and provide things. Here I have, let me have, maybe I have, there should be something. To get simple information and discuss what to do next. That's something that probably we don't use very much in our classes at this level. Train our students to be able to say what to do next. Because in cooperation, it's always about, not always, but it's also about what to do next. At B1 level, we go higher up and say, can make his, her opinions and reaction understood as regards possible solutions or the questions of what to do next. So it's more solution-oriented already, and at the higher B2 level can repeat back what someone has said in order to confirm understanding. If you can get your students to this, because that's the step onto B2. The fact that what I hear, I repeat to check whether I have understood correctly. This is what I understand. Is that what you want me to understand? We call that comprehension check. And it is a crucial element in communication, interaction. Very often, if we use a foreign language, very often we actually are not quite sure that what I understand was actually what that person was saying, and vice versa. So very often we have to do that comprehension check. Am I right? Is that what you want to say? Or did I make myself clear? So to clarify, to check comprehension. And at the basic level, well, I'm using basic, but it's here, basic. This, a little bit of comprehension check is what a successful user of English, of language at B1 level can do. By the way, that's repeating. I don't know what you, how you learned your English. Very often when I was in England, I just repeated what people were saying to me, and created the atmosphere that I was on track, that I was along, that I was understanding, right? And sometimes what I thought I repeated was not what that person was saying, right? And so you realize the difference. But by repeating, you learn a lot. You really do. So here we are, goal-oriented cooperation. We do have some, not a lot, but we do have some indicators in the framework which relate to what we call attitude. Two more, and then I promise that's the end of the descriptors. Cooperating. Bottom level can invite others into the discussion. What do you think?
I need to.
Actually, what do you think?
I don't think so.
Anyway, it's here. Can indicate when he or she is following. Mhm. Mind you, we at this level, we don't always think in terms of complete sentences. Right? We could say, if you say, what do you think? And you?
Yes.
That would be another invitation. And you, right?
Yes, exactly.
No. Right, a little bit above that, right? But here we are, still. B2, again, comprehension check, repeat back to confirm understanding. Summarizing things. Again, are we talking about, is this our topic? Exploit basic repertoire of language to help keep a conversation or discussion going. So at this level, we can actually invite people to contribute, to say what they think, and move on. We take responsibility of the success of the conversation. Here we cannot take responsibility because we are not able to. We can show that we want, but we cannot take responsibility. If there is nobody who, two A2 speakers, both speaking a foreign language, right? Let me think. A Chinese and a Dutch speaking English at A2 level. It works, but it works at that's probably when we see purist A2, right? Because they have to work with what they have got. And in the end, in the afternoon, I will show you an example of two people who need to communicate, but who are both not native speakers. So, here we are. And my last thing is socio-linguistic appropriateness. In other words, do I take into account the social context? Do I take into account the situation in which I communicate? Here, I may understand the situation, but I am not really able, language-wise, to do a lot about it. Very short, every day. But I should have underlined the word polite. At this level, you can be polite with very limited language resources. And you can be bloody impolite with high-level language. So politeness is something that goes with attitude, and that can be shown at each and every level. Again, simple basic routine. B1 is aware of conventions, rightly or wrongly, because at that level, not at the language level, at the age probably, we don't go a lot beyond cliches, right? We think Italians are like that. Probably the Italian I'm talking to is like that, probably not quite. So, but at this level, we probably be speaking at, which age would that be in your classes?
Adults.
Adults.
Yeah.
16,
16 to
17,
16, 17.
or 70 years old.
Yeah, but this is, apart from language development, is awareness of the world, or knowledge of the world. But it goes hand in hand. You you normally are not a really good communicator if you rely on language only. You need to have a little bit of knowledge of the world as well. And conventions is something that you would be aware of and you would take into account at that level. You would be aware of significant differences, usually between your own cultural world and the cultural environment your speaker, your partner, comes from. So there is some more awareness. But anyway, there is a few of those things which are not just language, but which are more than that and which probably apply to what we call attitude. Okay, fine. Comments? You want to examine, don't you?
Not really.
No,
We have to.
They make us.
Now let's start with assessment rather than examining. Now, later on I will come up with definitions. But basically assessment is the process of collecting evidence, of collecting data, so that the level of competence of a particular learner becomes obvious. You need to have evidence before you can say at which level that person is. And that's what you do. But assessment is more than just saying you are good, you are not good. It's definitely more than pass and fail. Assessment is a continuous dialogue where you as the teacher communicate with the learner, and the aim is learner development. But in order to help learners to develop, you need to tell them where they are. And in order to be able to tell them where they are, you need to have evidence. Now this evidence is not necessarily test results, but you may even use test instruments to measure competence. Here we are. So let us look at writing. In which formats do we have at that level, usually? At levels A2, B1, we have little more than a personal letter. We have probably email messages. We have probably social network entries and communication. And we have notes. Note-taking is something which I see you practice. And note-taking is something very personal, right? I would probably not be able to make much of Joan's notes, but he understands perfectly what these notes stands for, and vice versa. But it is writing. And when we look into that issue called dossier, which is a collection of evidence, we might also ask our learners to run notes, regular notes, and get them into their dossiers. It's evidence of what they can write. So, tell me, which criteria, what makes a good letter at that level? Email, etc. Tell me.
Basic polite greeting to start a letter and verbal to finish. Appropriate language to start and finish.
So an idea of beginning, the three things, beginning, ending, and the in-between. What?
And in between saying more or less what you want to say in a socially appropriate or socially acceptable and intelligible way.
As well as you can, okay, as well as you can. Anything else?
If it's relevant.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
basically that's more or less the same thing. If it's relevant, I think.
So with productive skills, and that's probably a big thing to say. With productive things, I don't normally produce for myself. I have somebody else in mind. Somebody who listens or somebody who reads what I produce. In classroom reality, this will be the teacher. But outside the school, you hardly ever talk or write to a teacher, do you? There are hundreds of other people who you talk and write to, probably not to your teacher. So, if you write and talk to your teacher, there is an understanding, common understanding between you and your teacher as to how well you can do things. And your teacher will understand. There's been research about student utterances. I know of speaking, where teachers understand at low level. Non-teachers don't understand. Because as a teacher, you automatically add flesh to the bone, so to speak, right? You get a word, and as a teacher, you have an idea of the unspoken. And you say yes. And you say interesting. And you say well done. I think we need to be aware of the fact that it's not outside this school environment. There are not that many teachers around. So the probability is high that our learners will have to communicate with non-teachers. And certainly not with their teacher. So with productive skills, it is usually somebody else. Receptive skills, it's me. If I communicate with somebody else, I am successful if that somebody understands. If that somebody doesn't understand, I am not successful. If I write a diary, it's for myself, okay. But usually if I write a message or a blog or whatever, I want people to read that. And I know that people will read that. And if it is rubbish, they will not understand, and my writing is useless. So when we talk about productive skills, we also need to talk about the reception of the other person. So if you talk, I listen. So your productive skill talking meets my listening comprehension skills. And if those two don't match, there will be no understanding or communication. So, in some way or other, at each and any level, I think one needs to look at learner performance from the recipient's point of view. Do I understand? Would I, if I were not your teacher, understand? Right? That's a criterion, understanding. So the effectiveness of what's being produced, we speak of productive skills. How effective is that, what we produce? So, I can come up with a few of those. Number one, in any given situation, has everything be dealt with. If I am supposed to write about my family, and I don't write about my parents, the person who reads will probably not get an idea about my family. So, because my writing was not complete, I haven't covered all the relevant